which will organize from time to time under the aegis of Indian Sociological Society, particularly under the banner of RC27. Uh, you know that this lecture series was first conceived by our respected President, Professor Maitrayee, who is with us. We are honored. And when she first told me that you have to organize such a lecture series, I immediately requested Professor Chaudhuri that, Madam, you should be the first speaker and you should inaugurate our lecture series. And I am grateful to our President, Madam, that she readily accepted my invitation. And today is this day when we are launching our lecture series with the inaugural speech of our President. Thank you, Madam. Welcome to this program. Today, Professor Chaudhuri will talk about sociology of care, context and concepts. But what is care? To the best understanding of my understanding, care embarks on a concern for others. And in this sense, it is very important for our existence. So when we say that care is embarks on concern for others, it is also sometimes we see that we talk about care of our own body, care of our own skin. Today, sometimes we talk, but even then, we, as a student of sociology, are interested in the manner in which interhuman relationships are changing out there and our own understanding of our own self in that context. So, this way or that, care is concern for others. But sometimes, particularly in a market-driven economy, some people tries to defy care and commodify, in a sense, care. But we should, as a student of sociology, we should not consider, we should not treat care as a thing, as a product. Rather, it is better to look at care uh, as a process. It is at the end of the day, it is a processual, it is associative, and it is in fact action oriented. As we move from dimension shaft kind of society, dimension shaft kind of organization to dimension shaft kind of social systems, here changes its form from family. The size of care itself, I can say, changes from individual level to familial level to neighborhood, and sometimes to secondary organizations like hospital and nursing homes, who becomes the site of giving care. In the entire journey of care, receiving care, giving, uh, the students of sociology are interested to look at the nuances, because usually we think in terms of some positive uh, thing about care, but care can also be negative. Care can be abusive. So we'll discuss all these issues, all these dimensions. Today we have one of the who needs no introduction at all, the President of Indian Sociological Society, Professor Maitrayee Chaudhuri, who will discuss the context and concepts, how, as a student of sociology, we understand the dialectics involved in the issue of care, involved in the process of care, and many more things. Professor Chaudhuri needs no introduction, I have said already, but it is a matter of formality, and as a convener, I should mention a few things about Professor Chaudhuri. Professor Chaudhuri taught at JNU from 1990 to 2021, almost 31 years. She was also the director of Women's Studies program there at JNU. Besides this, She was the first Professor India chair at McGill University and visiting professor of Albert Ludwig University. She was also the visiting fellow of Harvard University and University of Massachusetts. Her key publications include Women's Movement in India, The Practice of Sociology, very well-known book, Feminism in India. It is almost a textbook in many universities, including my own department, Sociology in India, and many more. Welcome, madam. We are really honored to have you. May I now request you to say a few things about sociology and care and kindly inaugurate this lecture session. Thank you, madam. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Soumyajit. Thank you, Professor Soumyajit Patra, for inviting me for the first lecture in RC 27. I'm very honored that Professor Sahu has also joined in. And the good part of these research committee lectures are they're being recorded by the ISS and they will be uploaded in the ISS YouTube because the whole idea of knowledge construction is the next generation can use it. Many more people who may not be here today, but will be in a position to access this from the ISS YouTube. That is the reason I thought this would be a good idea to build up some kind of resource for the next generation. So people who are a little more familiar with me, it's one of my favorite takes on context and concept. There is a relationship between any kind of field of inquiry, whether it is care work or care or any kind of research. There is always a context within which it emerges. The most important thing in sociology is that whenever we look at any particular concept, the point which Soumyajit had already mentioned, that it's taking care of others, I differ a little bit and I want to trace the shifting meanings of care. How was care defined in a particular context? So my argument is that why is it that I emphasize context whenever we talk about any phenomenon? And as you said, it's a sociological perspective is no sociological perspective if it does not emphasize context. Context change, along with context, fields of research and inquiry change. Say, I have worked for a long time on gender, but when I did my MA, there was no course on women's study. We never even knew anything like gender studies. It emerged later because of certain changes in society. Likewise, when we talk about care, we know the dictionary meaning of care. The dictionary meaning of care is looking after somebody, taking care of somebody, But the time and place within which care then becomes care work shifts. The whole issue that you referred to as the market. So where should I begin when I start talking about context? I begin with a typical dictionary definition of care, though I feel it may be inadequate to understand what we mean by sociology of care. Definitions, however, offer a base to understand a sense of what it is and how its meanings alter. It is good starting point. Definitions are good starting point, but by no means is it an end of all. It is not comprehensive. Unfortunately, in our practice of sociology, we often mistake the definition for the phenomena, the object of inquiry. So since care is an English word, what does the Oxford Dictionary say care is? They say care is how you should take, what kind of attention or thought you give to something you are doing so that you know how to avoid mistake. So they give an example. Great care is needed when choosing a used car. She chose her words with care. Or when we in Hindi or in Bengali, we may say, be careful, shabdhane. That is, there may be danger, be careful, pay attention. So care also has a certain idea of attention. But when we talk about caring, a caring person, we mean a compassionate person, somebody who's healing, who's taking care. So the idea of care also in sociology, we must be very, very careful. How then did the sociology of care emerge? What do we mean by the sociology of care? Now, very importantly, there's a history to it. It's very important to realize that. There was academic debates on care in the 1960s and 1970s. A lot of the studies on care was linked to the issue of what is private and what is public, what is work and what is not work. So, for example, feminist studies, Marxist studies, very central to the debate was that when you go and do a job, the kind of job I did in JNU or Soumyajit is doing or Professor Sahu is doing, we get a salary, we have legal contract, we get provident fund, we may or may not get pension. There is a legal sanctity to the work. It is employment. But when a housewife works and cooks, cleans, washes, in the private realm, it is unproductive and care work is associated with emotional labor. So it becomes very embarrassing and awkward if somebody says that their housework should be recognized. So people then blur what is the normative and the analytic. All of us learn in sociology that sociology is about what is, what exists, not what ought to be. So we normally refrain from normative position. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? We are just describing and analyzing. So in the private sphere, the woman would be working in a lot of things, but that would not be considered employment. She would not be getting a wage or a salary or a legitimacy, or it wouldn't even be counted. So you only had with the women's movement, for example, that you had a budget system, you have gender budget, you have a recognition of the work which is done by women within the house. The private realm, therefore, became unproductive. The public realm became productive. Now, if there are young scholars or who will be reading later, there is a wonderful book by Anne Oakley called Housewife. And she describes how before industrialization in Britain, all work actually took place inside the house. So supposing you're a weaver, you would have the weaving machine inside the house. There would be a hall. If you were spinning, the spinning machine would be in the middle. If you were a potter, the pottery's instruments would be in the middle. And everybody in the house would be working. A child, the wife, the mother, brother, sister, everybody would have a role. And there was no separation of productive public sphere and unproductive private. Work, labor, was within the home. In agriculture, you would have extended agricultural activities, which a lot of women would also do, wage labor would do, but there was no firm distinction that this is my private realm. Here, there is no money transaction. The public is where the money transaction takes place. So early debates, those of you who are familiar with Marxist debates of surplus value, they would say, okay, we have invisibilized the labor which is necessary for cooking, cleaning, washing, looking after children, etc. And it is this hidden labor which actually reproduces. So there is a lot of debate on social reproduction. So care has to be seen in the realm of social reproduction. That how are our clothes washed? Who looks after our parents when they are ill? Who looks after the aged? Who looks after the children? The social reproduction of society is done as work, but not recognized as work. So people started raising this question of this unrecognized work, which is not employment, but it is care work. So a lot of debates took place. And during the COVID, you will remember, there was a lot of writing in the newspaper. Middle class women like me, who are very often assisted in running their houses with the help of maybe a domestic worker, maybe a maid who does jharu pocha, or somebody else who may help me chop vegetables or wash clothes, that in most middle class homes in India, we outsource domestic labor. But in the West, for very long, they did it themselves. So only in the pandemic, the importance of domestic labor became very evident. So they are not caring for us in the sense of emotional investment, though very often it is. Very often working parents leave their children in the hands of domestic workers, and the child may get even more attached. So there is always an emotional labor. There is also a stereotyping, a gender stereotyping, that care work is done better by women because they naturally, grow up and are socialized. They're naturally mothers, daughters, sisters, and therefore they naturally are able to do care work. Here, too, is very important not to conflate the sociological with the common sense, because even the natural is different in different societies. So if you look at Margaret Mead's work, she has this wonderful work on growing up in Samoa, male and female, and she did a comparative study, and she found that in many societies in the Pacific Islands, the men were very involved in child rearing. They looked after their children, they fed their children, and it was not like how in modern societies the father was very detached. But today we have societies where, again, the fathers, I'm sure younger fathers here, are very involved in looking after their children. So it is context based. It is context based. In different kind of context, different notions of care takes place. But very importantly, it is not a psychological question. It is a social question. So sociology of care has to be located in a context where the issue of unproductive work and care labor as not being recognized took place. People, some of you may have heard about Maria Mies, who talked about how looking after husbands and education of children should be subsumed under the concept of subsistence production. The argument also was that a lot of this care work or domestic labor work is dull, monotonous, traditional. So when I write a paper, it sometimes is a little tiring, but sometimes it's very exciting. When I give a talk, sometimes it is very exciting to give a talk. But when I clean the kitchen after everybody has their dinner at night and put up this half katori dal in the fridge or clean up things or pack up, it is dull, monotonous. When I get up in the morning and I again start the business, so you make breakfast, but again you have utensils to be washed, it is dull and monotonous. Some of these issues have been written extensively by sociologists, feminist sociologists. Even if you look at the Sociological Bulletin, there's a lot of work on domestic labor and domestic work. Ironically, the issue of stratification is also very important here. Who are these women who leave their children to the care of somebody else and go and work somewhere else to care somebody else's children to earn their money? So if you study, I did a study of migrant labor from Bengal who work as domestic workers in Delhi. And many of them come singly. Only when they're a little settled, they bring their husbands or brothers or fathers. So it's primarily a female-driven migration. They are in care work. So they look after my kitchen, my family, my children. And her children and her family are then looked over by somebody who's poorer than her back in Bengal, who she brings, a young girl of 12 years, 10 years, 9 years, 11 years, who is given food and shelter, but in return will look after the child or look after the cooking and cleaning, because this domestic labor will be coming to houses like mine to do domestic labor. How do you define this work? It is care. She is taking care of my house. In the COVID time, many of us know how terrible the situation was for middle class women because they were not used to doing this labor. But this care is also a care work. So the recognition that care has to be understood in terms of care work, which is a sociological phenomena, a structural phenomena. This is a lot of work has happened. Like neoclassical economists, Marxists located love and altruism in the female sphere of the family and household, paid activities in the male-dominated public sphere. Feminist scholars criticize the division of private as feminine, public as masculine, work as in public, wage in public, private care work unrecognized. Despite all the criticism about the missing diversity of female carers in the analysis, the issue was represented that we must not naturalize female, male, public, private. So you have male nurses just like you have female nurses. But The male nurses are likely to come from particular locations, regions, stratifications. We all know about the diasporic nurses from Kerala who are all there in the hospitals across India, but now also in the global health industry across. How do we understand this global transaction of care work? We also have domestic workers who are hired by Indian origin families or sometimes Europeans who then take over a domestic worker for 5 months on a visa, and they're not allowed to come back, but they make enough money to make their lives a little better. Domestic workers from Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, or Philippines have a huge market in the global north. Many such families would have this, and they leave behind their own families, the care of their own children, to their families back home, because poverty has a certain of spiraling reproduction. Care, therefore, reproduces and symbolizes global inequalities. When we study care, we have to bring in this question of migrant labor. We have to talk about women in developing countries emigrating to more developed countries to help provide for their families back home by sending remittances. There is a concept called global care chain. It's a globalized labor market for workers who provide care-intensive labor, such as childcare, elder care, health care. So it is a sociological phenomenon. We cannot reduce it only to the issue of compassion and love, but it is more likely an issue where the word care invisibilizes the labor behind that care. The word care invisibilizes the social structure and stratification in this practice. Now, work is often defined by describing what is done in fields, factories, offices, schools, shops, call centers, homes, and so on to make a life and a living. Examples of work in our commercial society include driving a taxi, selling washing machines. This is a Western example. Managing a group of software developing, supermarket, screenings to smartphones, assembly line. In our country, work could mean the unorganized sector. During the COVID, when the migrants worked back, how many of us in the middle class world knew that there's so many unorganized labor in our urban sphere, who we do not normally see? It therefore becomes important to shift the discussion of care to care work and employment and say they are as much production or a part of production in contemporary world. Apart from the concept of care chain, if you discuss sociology of care, you must also look at emotional labor. Hochschild scholarship is mandated to read Hochschild, Hochschild, who worked on emotional labor. And when there was a shift from manufacturing to service labor, there was a shift where women, say the air hostesses, they have to monitor or manage their own emotions in order to take care of others. And women were again drawn, hotel industry, malls, shops, clubs, where women's labor would be used for emotional labor. And Horschel notes that female flight attendants, air hostesses, for instance, are subject to a wide array of emotional expectations: friendly batter, smiling, interest in travel. So there's a whole category called emotional. And this sociologically can be called estranged emotion, because you may be wanting to actually hit somebody, but you have to take care of them, serve them. This is called surface acting. And a lot of very good work on sociology of care has talked about surface acting and how women or men who are in the service sector have to display emotions which are in contradiction with their own internal feelings. Employees' health suffers in this case. Sociology of care, therefore, has to address the structural imperatives of looking at the changing meaning of care, the issue of gender, the undervalued evaluation of work, the shift from manufacturing to the service where care work becomes very important. Care recipient, the category global care chain, the category of emotional care, the category of care recipients who are infants, school-age children, elderly people, and care providers. So you have to see it also as an organization or network. And within this alone, sociology of care would make sense, or otherwise we are going to be reduced to a kind of psychological or a kind of common sense understanding of care. This is hardcore sociology, and I hope that RC27 gets some wonderful presentations and active members too, because this is a cutting edge theme and it can be developed very, very well. Thank you very much for this opportunity, Professor Patra.
Thank you, Madam. You have really contextualized the issue of care, how care creates hierarchies, how care creates gender divisions. But one thing I must confess here, that another important dimension I have noticed, that care has altogether become an adult's affair. In many instances, the children in many families, they provide care. And in the entire discourse of care, they are absent. We do not take into consideration the services provided by the children. So I think the sociology students and scholars interested in sociology of care should also consider this dimension. Then I think we should come to the concluding part. Again, I am grateful as the convener of RC27. She's also giving us assurance that she will give me some more names who are experts in this field, and within a very short period we'll come back with some other stalwarts in the field. Thank you, madam. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.